welcome to Dialogue. Today we'll be talking to Mr. Rudolf Scharping. He is the former Defense Minister of Germany and also the former National Chairperson of the Social Democratic Party of Germany. After leaving politics, he founded his own company to provide strategic consulting on doing business in China. I'm honored to pick his brain about China-EU relations, China-Germany ties, and operating businesses in China. That is our topic. I'm Wang Guan. All right, Mr. Scharping, great to have you with us. You've been to China many times. You've dealt with China both as a government official and later on as a business person. Tell us about how do you look at China's rise? Do you see China as this hostile and aggressive power, as some narratives put it, or as a peaceful and a responsible country?
Well, first of all, thanks for the invitation. And I observed the development of China since the 1980s. And I always understood that China is constructive in global topics and global challenges. And China made a remarkable rejuvenation in the last 40 years, especially since the opening up and modernization led by Deng Xiaoping. So basically, I would say China is a constructive power on the globe. And by the way, it's an indispensable power on the globe, because all the global challenges we are facing as mankind can only be solved by cooperation, and that includes China.
But if we look at this from the point of view of Western powers, Western countries, the latest survey suggests that the perception of China has reached a historically low point with negative perceptions on the rise. Why is that?
Well, you should not overestimate polls. Although I could argue that here in Germany, for example, China has a lot of trust and confidence among the citizens. There are conflicts, yes, and we need to know how to handle different interests, maybe conflicts, and so on. I'm arguing for something like a basic principle, that is cooperation. On the global level, all the challenges we are facing, is it climate change? Is it weapons of mass destruction, their limitations and their reduction and their control? Is it terrorism? Is it any kind of global challenge? We only can master it, can meet the needs, can make the life of our citizens better by cooperation on the global stage and in the global range of challenges we are faced with.
You've traveled extensively in China. Tell us about the China in your eyes.
Well, as said, I am observing China since the 1980s, first in a political position, then as a businessman. In the last 15 years, I spent more than 250 visits to China, cooperating with Chinese institutions, with Chinese municipalities, Chinese companies, and so on, as well as with German counterparts. Sure, that makes a clear picture of China. China is an economic power. China is a global political player, and everything we are facing as mankind, as challenges in a global range, will be better solved and managed in cooperation with China, not in confrontation with China.
Well, I'm really curious to know, the perception of China before you made the first trip to China versus the China that you saw with your own eyes.
Well, I have been in China in the 1980s. That was a very poor, underdeveloped country. I visited Beijing, I visited Anhui, I visited Shanghai. I saw the situation of the people and talked to a lot of them. And my clear perception is that time China was an underdeveloped, very poor country. Now, after 40 years since the opening up and modernization by Deng Xiaoping and the Chinese people and government, it is a global power. And that is a return of China on something like a place China held in the last 18 out of 20 centuries. China always, except the time of this century of humiliation, was a global leading power in economic, technical, and not to forget, cultural terms.
All right, China is kicking off its 14th five-year plan starting from the year 2021, that is this year. How do you look at it, and what opportunities do you think it will present for Germany and Europe?
Well, this 14th five-year plan is a clear signal that China now is something like a society and a country with some medium economic well-being. And it describes and outlines very clear the Chinese ambition to become a more wealthy, a more healthy, a more greener economy and society. And what I see is that is in the best benefit and in the best interest of the Chinese people.
All right, Mr. Scharping, we know that you were the party chairman of the Social Democratic Party of Germany. That, of course, has been evolving over the decades. In fact, back in the late 19th century, when it was first founded, it was one of the first Marxist-influenced parties anywhere in the world. So first of all, how relevant do you think Marxism still is today?
In the world of today, well, it's something like a mindset. It is something like a history, but the real influence of Marxism, from my point of view, is not really strong in our global village, so to say. What we see is that the Chinese development is based on principles and pragmatism. And that is well balanced. And we also see it here in Germany. If it comes to my party, look, we are founded in 1863. And since then, we had a lot of successes and also some failures. And that is the history of every party, including the Chinese Communist Party. History is not something like a draw line through the times. It is up and down, it is trial and error, it is experience and perspective. And from this angle, I would say China in the last 100 years also had historical ups and downs, Japanese aggression, civil war, the Long March, and all these things. So there are some very crucial points in the Chinese development as well. And I would say, look on the outcome, look on the result, look on what is now the driving force within China. And I would say you created something like a middle class, and you have to overcome also some of the discrepancies within such a development between the rich and the poor, between the urban and rural regions in China, and not to forget one experience. If you allow me, I tell you an experience in Germany. After World War II, Germany was not only militarily beaten, but also liberated by the Allied forces, and the people, their daily life, that was absolutely poor. The cities were destroyed and so on. What was the main interest? Create houses, build schools, develop hospitals, create jobs, make sure that the daily life is somehow livable, that you can survive. So we started something like a very, very fast economic development. We didn't care about the environment. In the end, we had rivers and seas and lakes completely poisoned. It was not so much good to eat fishes from these rivers and lakes, and so on and so on. Sometimes this experience also forgotten in Germany among younger citizens. We should not forget there is some similarity, although for very different reasons, but there is some similarity. China also developed very rapidly, economically and so on. And now we also see that China experiences and turn into action to make the economy more green, more sustainable, more environmentally friendly. And that is one of the big ambitions of your 14th five-year plan. And we can exchange these experiences. And by the way, we also can exchange not only experiences, but technologies, and create the need to make a more sustainable growth into something like also a good opportunity for business and working places.
I'm going to shift gears a little bit and talk about China-Germany relations today, full of challenges, but also opportunities. What are the biggest changes, in your opinion, that have taken place in China-Germany cooperation in the past few years?
Let me start with another point. The German chancellors, Helmut Kohl, Helmut Schmidt, Gerhard Schröder, Angela Merkel, they understood very well how to handle China, how to handle the political, economical, and other issues. And they understood, and that is my advice, to understand also in the future, the whole range, the full range of our relationship. It's not only trade. Trade is important, yes, but it is investment. It is technological cooperation. It is cooperation among universities. It is partnership among cities and so on. What I want to say is, if you focus only on one issue, which is in conflict, then you probably lose the view on the full range of a very well-developed relationship between China and Germany, or China and the European Union. And we have to take into account, as responsible political and business leaders, the full range of relationships, not only one point, one single issue, one single topic, which narrows the view on what we have reached. And that is the best relationship in history we ever had.
But are you concerned that somehow the political side of the relationship may somehow drag down the other aspects of the relationship that you've just mentioned, economic, trade, investment? Because it looks to many to be the case right now.
There's a risk. Yes, sure, there is a risk. And that is why I hope that responsible forces discuss the full range of our relationship. Look on the human rights issue. There's also something like the full range of human rights. The human rights are also talking about freedom of fear, freedom of starving, right of education, and so on and so on. If you're looking on the whole picture, then it is easier to handle those topics, those issues which are under very different views. And we have to discuss this very frankly and very polite and respectful. But we also have to decide who is talking about what. We all know there is a cultural difference between China and Europe or Germany, which has to do with philosophy, which has to do with cultural development, with the European Enlightenment, and so on and so on. There are very, very many aspects of this, but the difference is, and the solution, or my conclusion is, don't forget these differences, respect them, and make them a starting point for a fruitful exchange.
Yeah, but Mr. Scharping, how do you think China-EU relations can really grow despite their differences on the issue of human rights? I mean, how can the two sides really effectively bridge the gap of understanding, bridge the gap of definition, like you just said, on the issue of human rights?
Yeah, but look, I take one example. We have reached this agreement on a comprehensive investment agreement between the European Union and China. And now in this, I think, very difficult and dangerous process of sanctioning each other, we probably lose the focus. The focus should be, let's handle this comprehensive agreement on investment as if it is existing, as if it is ratified. Although there are parliaments who need to ratify this agreement, nobody should have any hesitation on handling it as if it is ratified and existing, in power, so to say. What I'm looking for is a pragmatic way to overcome the difficulties and discrepancies in a constructive way. And my proposal is in line with many in the business sector with somehow political experience background, arguing we need to develop our relationship because on the global level, cooperation is the main principle. On the bilateral level, it's also cooperation, although there are discrepancies.
All right, we've been talking to Mr. Rudolf Scharping, former Defense Minister of Germany and also former National Chairman of the Social Democratic Party of Germany. We'll take a short break. Stay with us. Welcome back. Mr. Scharping, I want to pick up on where we left, that is China-EU investment deal. Where are things headed? What is the right thing to do right now?
Well, first, don't lose focus. Second, be constructive. Third, try to find solutions in a common interest, a so-called win-win situation. And that is why I'm arguing that the Chinese-European agreement on investment should be handled as if ratified. Both sides can set constructive examples, pave the way for a better relationship in this regard. And the Europeans need to understand that is a challenge, challenging the European position and the European interest in a global range. China made an agreement which creates the biggest free trade zone on the globe with Japan, with Australia, with New Zealand and many other Asian countries. So that is a remarkable step and also a challenge for the European Union. Not to forget the phase one agreement between the United States and China. It's also a challenge. What I'm arguing for is the European Union has to identify, has to define, and has to follow its own interest. And in my view, the political leadership, as well as the business leadership, the cultural and other societal leaderships, are well advised to look for opportunities for cooperation, not to overlook and oversee and to forget the differences which are existing, but in the sense of we try to find ways to bridge those differences and discrepancies in the best interest of our economies and, more importantly, our societies and people.
And then from the point of view of a business person, how would you say this business deal, this trade deal between China and the EU can bring tangible benefits to people like yourself?
It's not about me. It's about the societies, our citizens, and the companies providing jobs and business opportunities. So it's not about a single person or a single company. It's about a nation, its economy, and its citizens. So in this view, from this perspective, for sure, to intensify cooperation and to find better ways into the future, that's crucial. And again, between Germany and China, for example, we call it a strategic partnership, and that's correct. It is a strategic partnership in the full range of relationships between two nations. And that is my starting point if it comes to issues like these discrepancies about human rights, Xinjiang, Hong Kong, and whatever.
Right. In an article you wrote in March, you said when dealing with Beijing, the West should rely on confident cooperation instead of destructive confrontation. How do you think the two sides can achieve that?
Well, we cannot achieve it alone. we need an understanding and a partner in Beijing, and I'm sure there are those partners. You have a very strong leadership under Xi Jinping, and I think China giving its political importance, giving its economic power, giving its technological development, giving its innovation power, and so on. You can see that China is not something you can ignore. Those who are in this logic of sanctions, ignorance, not respectful handling of international issues, that is a risk, and I hope that all the leaderships around the globe, including the United States, will be wise enough to find better, more constructive ways into the future.
You know, over the years, there has been much talk about this concept, European strategic autonomy, also known as European sovereignty. Emmanuel Macron talked about it. Angela Merkel talked about it. What is your understanding of this concept, not just in theory, but also in practice?
In both regards, theoretically as well as in very practical terms, we need to have a very clear, understandable, accountable, reliable strategy, balancing well our political considerations and convictions on, for example, personal freedom, human rights, and so on, with within the full range of our relationships to China. The European Union is a global player, should be a stronger, more powerful global player, and to make sure that this strong, more global role of the European Union is really constructive. It has to balance the economic, the cultural, and the human rights aspects of political development.
Does that mean there will be more balancing when it comes to Europe's relationship with both the US and China?
Yes, the Europeans should not define their interests along another one. They have to develop their own interest and to define it and make it understandable to the world outside the European Union or Europe. And for sure, in specific regards, we are very close to the United States if it comes to political issues like individual freedom, if it comes to human rights and so on. We are closer to the United States. If it comes to the economic interest, it is more balanced, and China has a very, very strong role in Europe and a very strong interest on the European side to develop this partnership and this relationship well. If it comes to, let's say, innovation, artificial intelligence or other issues, we can see we are competitors, but we also are partners. If it comes to environmentally friendly technologies, resource and material efficiency, and all these things to make an economy more sustainable, we are both. We are partners and we are competitors. And that is a good thing, to be partner and competitor, because it gives both parties involved a very, very strong motivation to make it better. And that is good for the people.
But don't you think that now that Joe Biden has been sworn in and carrying out his foreign policy, his pledge to revive the alliances across the Atlantic, do you think the European strategic autonomy is still that relevant today? Or is the EU turning back to its old alliance system with the US?
That's not a contradiction. Europe is a global player and should be stronger, in my view, should be more independent, and should not define its own interests along someone else's interests. Is it an American, an Asian, Chinese, or whatever interest? First of all, it is our interest. And one very important part of our own European interest is global cooperation. As said, climate change, weapons of mass destruction, terrorism, and other topics. these are challenges we have to meet together. There is a lot of opportunity, a lot of chances to do better. And from this angle, from this perspective, I'm completely sure the Europeans will develop something on their own. And then from there we'll start and continue, continue cooperation more intensively with all constructive players around the globe.
Then what is the greatest cooperation potential, in your opinion, between EU and China in the next few years, in the foreseeable future?
Well, specifically if it comes to Germany, if you take Germany as something like an indispensable piece of Europe, we have this very intensive cooperation on the research and innovation level if it comes to the more than 1,000 projects among German and Chinese universities. We have this very intensive cultural exchange, and I hope the pandemic will allow us very soon, not the pandemic, the fight against the pandemic and the results will allow us to intensify this exchange in cultural terms, in sports, and so on and so on. We have a lot of other things to develop with China and with regard to China's role in Asia and on the globe. So again, given the full range of our relationship, I see more opportunities than risks.
All right, finally, the Germans are going to the polls to select a new leader to succeed Angela Merkel, German Chancellor for the past 16 years. What can we expect from these elections?
For sure, new Chancellor, but not necessarily fundamentally new policies. The Germans like continuity. If I'm looking on the polls and what I see among the citizens, well, there is a lot of speculation on the way, but we also know the result of a federal election in Germany never was according to the polls 5 months before the election. So, you know, look, China. China has a very strong ability and a very good tradition to think in long terms, in historical, let me say, ground waves. What is the long-term development? And so my advice to observers outside Germany is be a little bit more relaxed and be a little bit more sure that the Germans are reliable and accountable partners, and that a change within the government will not change Germany's position as an accountable and reliable partner in the European Union and the globe, on the globe and with China.
So you don't think there will be a fundamental change, for German-China relations going forward?
I don't see a fundamental. I see some adjustments. I do not see a fundamental exchange.
Mr. Rudolf Scharping, thank you so much for being with us.
Thank you.
And that will do it for this edition of Dialogue. Thank you for watching. I'm Wang Guan in Beijing.